Hello, guilty feminists. I hope you're all wrapping up for Christmas. To accompany your present wrapping, here's a short story that at the very least will tell you something about a part of the world you may not know very much about, and a person I think you'd like to know, the kind of person who puts her freedom on the line to defend other people's rights. This little episode will also give you something you can do for her, something creative and mindful as an individual or a family to show solidarity this holiday. But first, you need to know the story.
You see what's going on. The government want to silence us.
Kyrgyzstan is a landlocked country in Central Asia and home to just 7 or so million people. Although it is mountainous and isolated, it has lain at the crossroads of historic civilizations and along the momentous Silk Road that connected East and West for 1,000 years of trade. In some ways, Kyrgyzstan has been a model for human rights in modern history. But now, that is being rapidly undermined. Today, we'll hear 3 reasons why this should matter to you. 2 things you can do about it, and 1 woman's story that could be any of ours. I'm Matilda Mallinson for The Guilty Feminist and Amnesty International. And this is Right for Rights, why we should care about Kyrgyzstan.
Здравствуйте всем.
As you can hear, our guest today is calling me in her native language, so we've got a little help from a couple of translators. You'll hear 2 other English voices over the course of this interview, but both are speaking for the same woman. It's important to note that due to the spontaneous nature of simultaneous interpreting, the recording can only ever be used for information purposes and does not serve as the official version of the communication.
I would like to say hello to everyone. I'm Rita Karasartova. I'm an economist. I'm a teacher, and I set up a civil rights organization. So this is about me. This is about my life.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you to start the story with the events of the 23rd of October last year. What happened that day?
All people who believe in human rights, we decided to join forces and we decided to defend democracy. We were ready that the government would try to impede, but we didn't expect what happened.
On the 23rd of October 2022, Rita Karasartova and 22 other activists, bloggers and politicians were detained for opposing a border demarcation agreement with Uzbekistan. The agreement would hand over control of a local water source to the neighbouring government. Locals feared how it would affect them and what was in it for the government of Kyrgyzstan. At first, the 23 were detained on charges of organising mass disorder. By now, they face over a decade in prison for allegedly attempting to violently overthrow the government.
We wanted to work together with the members of parliament, but all of us were arrested. It was a very brazen storm. They raided my house. Well, that's about it. This is the story of my arrest. At this point in time, I didn't think they would detain me for 8 months.
This has become known as the Kempir Abad case, named after the water reservoir the campaigners were trying to defend. 16 of those arrested are still detained, awaiting trial in Kyrgyzstan, where a third of pre-trial detention centres are in dark, damp, and poorly ventilated basements. Conditions Amnesty fears could amount to torture.
10 women live on the surface of 27 square meters, and this includes the toilets. 8 months in a room of 27 square meters and 1 hour walk per day. It was impossible. We couldn't speak to our loved ones.
What was the reason given by the state for holding you and your colleagues in detention for 8 months? How did they justify that?
They said that we were calling
к
for
свержению власти. Потом чуть
forcible
позже они
seizure of
уже
power,
власть.
and that
Они
our
сразу
ultimate
поставили
objective
такое
is to seize the
очень
state.
ясное сейчас.
Rita, now under house arrest, faces charges so extreme they mean the usual protections designed to ensure fair and open justice suddenly no longer apply.
Everything's
Никаких
classified
документов для того,
now.
чтобы
We
суд
actually didn't
держали
have
в руках.
any access to any
Нам не дали до
documents,
конца
and
находиться,
11
просто
colleagues
увели в
have
судебное
not had
разбирательство,
any
их
access
вывозить
to
не
court
будут.
hearings.
Будут
So they are
рассматривать.
going
Все знаем, что
to precede the trial
в
in
устном
absentia,
производстве
and
человек
this
должен
is a
быть, должен быть.
blanket violation
И
of
когда мы
court
сказали, мы хотим,
procedure.
не
So we
было
wanted
никакого
to appeal,
документа, он сказал, документы
but
вместе с судебным
we were devoid of the right to
уничтожили
appeal. We're trying
для
to
того, чтобы
find
хоть все это
other
абсурд
ways. We're
как-то
trying to stop this absurd situation and to get back to fair trial.
The law Rita faces is Article 36 of Kyrgyzstan's Criminal Code, the attempt to violently overthrow the government. Articles like this, supposedly related to national security, often write into the law loopholes to other laws for the people with the power to implement them. It's an instrument we see weaponized by seemingly democratic governments all around the world. The World Justice Project's Human Rights Review for 2023 found that fundamental rights have weakened in more than 3/4 of countries in recent years. Here in the UK, for example, concern has been raised over the government's plans to circumvent an international human rights verdict in order to implement their deportation deal with Rwanda that would see asylum seekers exported to the African nation. For more reporting on this, subscribe to our news podcast, Media Storm, where next year's season will bring you weekly current affairs analysis through the lens of human rights and lived experience. But for now, our eyes are on Kyrgyzstan.
This article in the law is being used not just against civil rights defendants, but regular people who criticize the state. People write something on Facebook and then they are sent to detention centers. There are about 50 cases ongoing now. So this is something very common, attempting forcible seizure of power.
I assume that you don't consider that you were trying to violently overthrow the government. So why do you think you have been accused of this? Why do you think this law is really being used?
I think that it was to shut us up because the Russian influence, we were really very much against the war in Ukraine. Russia became very active in Kyrgyzstan. So I think that this is also part of geopolitical issue. And I think that it is connected to the influence of Russia as well.
If peaceful critics and protesters continue to be silenced and detained, what do you think will happen in your country?
I think that the intensity will become very huge, and I'm really afraid how it will come out. It will be absolutely unpredictable. I'm very much afraid of radicalism.
Rita, will you tell us now, what is it that you're speaking out for today? What is the main message you want to get across to people?
We don't want them to release us. We just want to have open trial. We want to be heard. Thank you for watching Kyrgyzstan. We don't want our state to be totalitarian. We want to have democracy in this country. And everything we've been doing, we're doing that for our children. Kyrgyzstan might become totalitarian as our neighbors, or Kyrgyzstan can be a democracy. We'll be fighting for democracy.
It's a very crucial juncture. Either they can go back on all the repressive legislative initiatives that they're currently trying to rush through Parliament, or they can press on, silencing any critical voices.
To understand more about the wider context at play, let's hear from Maisie Weisherding, a researcher for Amnesty specialising in Central Asia.
Kyrgyzstan is a party to all the international human rights treaties, and actually Kyrgyzstan has been elected to the Human Rights Council, and that's, I think, why we're so concerned.
I asked her to tell us why Kyrgyzstan seems to be backtracking on human rights and political freedoms.
It's become much worse over the latest change of government and the new president, Sabajaparov. Corruption plays a huge part in it. Getting your hands on the money that comes in from exploiting natural resources. Any human rights defenders who are looking into corruption, that is very uncomfortable for the current authorities.
But I also asked her why those of us outside Kyrgyzstan should care. Her first reason was geopolitics.
The whole questioning of the universality of human rights, saying that human rights are actually Western. That is a very deliberate political choice to align yourself with China and Russia. China is actually giving a lot of money to Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan geopolitically is in a very strategic position, linking China to markets in Europe. China will just come in and build roads and highways. They will also obviously give money to the government. And China is not asking any questions, is not imposing conditions, is not actually looking at the country's human rights record before they release any funds.
The second reason why Amnesty says we should care about Rita's story is because the problems she faces may not be as far afield as we think.
The right to protest in the UK and what we've seen very recently with protests in support of Palestine, the arbitrary arrests of people who haven't been advocating hate or violence is very much like what we've been seeing in Kyrgyzstan, imposing bans on where you can have a peaceful protest. In a way, I think now it might be even easier for people here to understand.
But fundamentally, wherever in the world we are, defending human rights is an issue that unites us across borders and cultures and time.
I think the main message is for people to realise that what is happening to Rita and her family is something that can happen to anyone. You might be at a protest to defend your local water source from being polluted by sewage, and suddenly there you are in detention. It can happen to you too.
So what can you do? Amnesty International's Right for Rights campaign calls on people all around the world to join a grassroots movement to protect the people being persecuted for protecting others.
For Rita, I think we're asking not only for people to write to the government and ask for the criminal charges against her to be dropped, but we've also been asking people to send letters of solidarity to Rita to actually show her that she's not on her own.
Stand together in solidarity with defenders of human rights. Visit amnesty.org.uk.